Thanks for joining us today at the SMB Report. It's the podcast on business for the community of small and medium-sized businesses. I'm your host, Kirk LaPointe. My guest today is one of British Columbia's leading economists, Oxford-educated David Williams. He's the Vice President of Policy at the Business Council of British Columbia, and his research on the economy, I've used it a lot, has been exceptionally insightful in raising awareness and signaling the challenges BC faces in the pursuit of prosperity and greater productivity, and in light of difficult finances publicly at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels of government. David, thanks for joining me. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start at the top line issues, the top of the wave stuff, so that we can set up the conversations in more detail. So how are we doing?
Well, it's a bit of a mixed story. So as a policymaker, you want to have a country where you have rising prosperity, where people are enjoying higher incomes per person over time. And there's two ways that you can achieve that. One is that you get higher world prices for what you produce. Now, you don't control that. World prices are what they are. The good news for Canada is that since China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, we've been getting wonderful prices for what we export to the rest of the world, which is mainly natural resources and manufacturing, commodities and so forth. And then what we import to the rest of the world, the prices have not grown as fast. So we've actually benefited from a rise in purchasing power due to favorable world prices. It's something we don't control, but between 2000 and 2008, and again since 2019 to now, we got a bit of a lift in purchasing power.
And we get used to it.
It's been very good.
We get used to it and we kind of almost depend on it, don't we?
That's right.
Yeah.
The other side of that is you can produce more per person. And so anybody who's listened to any of my, read any of my articles, I talk a lot about GDP per person. Mm-hmm. So GDP, for your listeners, is gross domestic product. So gross just means before depreciation, before accounting for the fact that assets wear out and you have to replace them. Domestic means it's produced within our borders. And production, well, that's production. So essentially it's the amount of income or output that an economy produces over a period of time. And we care about that on a per person basis, right? So you're able to produce more per person, and there's two ways to do that. One is to have more hours worked per head of population. That's called labour utilisation. And the other is labour productivity. We spend a lot of time in Canada talking about labour utilisation through immigration policy, daycare subsidies, and so forth. We spend very little time talking about labour productivity, and that's where our problems lie.
Yeah. Productivity is a very large term. It kind of entails a raft of different things. People often associate productivity with, are you a hard worker or are you kind of lazy? No, that isn't what we're measuring here. No. What are we measuring?
We're talking about getting more outputs per unit of input. So here, the inputs we're talking about here is labour, the amount of hours that we work. So for every hour that we work across the whole economy, we produce about $60 US, essentially, worth of stuff. And there are some industries that produce more than others. So in natural resource sectors like mining, we produce closer to $300 per hour. In energy, it's more like $1,000 per hour. In accommodation and food service, it's more like $25 per hour. It really varies. So if we do more of one thing or another, our productivity changes. And even within those sectors, deploying more capital equipment, deploying more innovation, technology, better business practices, all operating at scale, all of that raises our productivity.
So in trying to raise our productivity, it often depends on whether you have access to the best tools.
Yes.
The latest technology,
yes.
Whether you're educated properly and how to use all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Those are the factors. It's not just simply whether, I come to work.
No, it's not about working
stealing for a big day, that kind of thing.
It's not about that.
Yeah.
It's about being more effective by having better tools.
So how are we doing as a country?
Well, this is the problem. In terms of, I mentioned at the very start, we can get better prices for what we're producing, or we can produce more per person. So on the former, yes, we're getting better world prices thanks to favourable world trade prices. But on the latter, in terms of producing more per person, we are going sideways. So adjusted for population, Canada's economy essentially hasn't grown in 10 years. It's almost the same size. We're producing almost as much per person as we were 10 years ago.
So we're not actually richer.
We're not, well, what we're selling to the rest of the world has gone up in value. So in that's supporting real wage growth, right? But we're not producing more per person, and that's kind of the alarm bells should be ringing around that, because at some point world trade prices may turn against you. We might have a drop in energy prices or so forth. And at that point, well, we're not producing more per person, and that's because our productivity is so poor. And that's where you have to start to accept a lower standard of living.
And our neighbors, the Americans, have much higher productivity than we do. We're at what? Somewhere around 70, 71, 72%?
We're about, well, we produce about 57, I think it's $57 or $60 US per hour worked. In the United States, it's around 100. In Australia, which is another resource-based economy, it's around 70. And in the United Kingdom and Europe, it's about $73 per hour of value added produced. So we're much, much lower. And if you look at just GDP per person over the past 10 years, the United States has generated about 2% extra GDP per person per year. We've barely generated more than 1% in total over that time. We've actually grown by 0.2% per year. So Canada's economy has been the second worst performing economy in the world, adjusted for population, over the past decade.
Wow.
Which is really striking. And then now we layer on top of that the additional challenge that President Trump's agenda presents to Canada.
And where does British Columbia fit into the Canadian picture, much less the North American or the world picture?
We're very similar in most respects in that the last decade we've become very reliant on supercharged population growth and supercharged growth in government spending, neither of which are sustainable. The only difference really between BC and the rest of Canada over the past decade has been the mega capital projects. So Site C, Trans Mountain, LNG Canada and Coastal GasLink. Those were once in a generation projects, close to $100 billion of capital expenditure. And they lifted the economy of BC relative to the rest of Canada. Not great. Like we're still historically weak. We're still far weaker than our historical average. But relative to the rest of Canada, those projects made us do a little bit better up until 2022.
When they started subsiding, right?
That's right.
When we stopped really constructing those.
Correct.
We can operate them, but that doesnin carry the same lift, right?
The construction is really where you get the big lift, and then obviously the operation is still good. But so in the last 2 years, the economy in BC, adjusted for population, shrank by about 2% in 2024 and about 1% in 2023. And I think people feel that intuitively. I don't think you need to be an economist to understand that. I think people feel it when they try to pay the groceries and
particularly in the regions of the province where these projects were being constructed. I mean, it had a material lift.
That's right.
and a material boom and bust when it comes. But you keep hearing that our gross domestic product keeps growing. Is that just simply because of migration, of the numbers of people who have come to the country, and in fact we're not really getting a real per capita kind of GDP growth?
Yeah, so if you look at the academic literature on immigration, what it generally finds is that the relationship between immigration or population growth and GDP per person is about neutral over the long run. If you've got, if you've got a few more people, which means you've got a few more residents, a few more customers, a few more potential workers, but don't forget about the denominator. Divide that by the population, and that's really the economic pie that we all get to share. And that just doesn't really is not really affected by immigration. But for reasons passing understanding, our immigration policy became wildly disconnected from academic research. And we came to believe that immigration policy was like a magic pill or a get-rich-quick scheme. And so the federal government ramped up immigration to about 1.3 million people per year. That's like adding another British Columbia to Canada every 4.5 years. But they didn't just increase the level, they also changed the composition. Traditionally, immigration has been mostly about permanent immigration. Your best chance at having an immigration policy that's pro-prosperity, that raises GDP per person, is where the average income of a newcomer, and I'm a newcomer, the average income is higher than the Canadian-born average. That's your best chance. But when you add independents and grandparents and children and so forth, it starts to wash out. They also changed the composition of immigration so that it was about there was an extra about 800,000 temporary workers, which often went into low-wage industries, which wasn't really productivity enhancing. It was actually going in the other direction. So in the last 3 years, which I think I have to check this, but I think it's the only time in Canadian history that productivity growth has actually declined for 3 consecutive years.
So was it a change of policy also? I remember when we were looking at the so-called economic immigrant, the one who was bringing investment to the country. And in order to get your citizenship, you basically you were paying hundreds of thousands of dollars or bringing hundreds of thousands of dollars with you to the country. Did we just relent on that? Did we need to have service level employment satisfied by newcomers because we weren't doing this ourselves? I mean, what were some of the dynamics in there that made this a bit of a different mix?
Well, the immigrant investor scheme, I think that closed in it was either 2014 or 2016, if I remember correctly. And there was a report that was done on that and was largely discredited the program as being hopelessly ineffective. And so that was kind of abandoned. But the federal government writ large adopted an approach where they increased the population by incredible amounts per year. So if you go back to 1946 until 2015, on average, immigration was about 0.5% of the existing population. Before the pandemic, we got to about 1.3%, which was on par with 1957-58, which was the Hungarian Revolution and the Suez Canal crisis. We had a big humanitarian intake at that time. So it was big before the pandemic. After the pandemic, we took that ratio to 3% of the existing population. So 6 times the historical average. So, if I was designing Canadian immigration policy and I was trying to figure out what's the absorptive capacity of the economy to incorporate newcomers and ensure that everybody gets a good standard of living, I would probably start with the premise that it's about 0.5% of the population. Sorry, 0.5% of the existing population. The annual immigration intake should be about 0.5% of the existing population, because that's been the average since 1946.
Because you can't build housing fast enough, schools fast enough, medical facilities fast enough, like all of these services that people correctly need when they arrive here weren't there. So then I want to shift ourselves to the public policy that goes around how it is that you support that growth in your population if you're going to get the lift for your GDP. And one of the things that keeps drawing us back appears to be our tax competitiveness in this province, in this country, and where all of that is right now. So let's start. Let's kind of start at the senior government level, and where Canada and where British Columbia in particular are around that. And then I know you've done some really interesting research on municipal stuff, which I think affects many of the small and medium-sized business owners that would be watching us right now. Let's go at the senior level first, and where we are, again, relatively to other countries, in our own tax, tax load.
Well, I mean, the general principle that I'm advocating for here is that we need a pro-productivity agenda. We've taken our eye off productivity. We've been too focused on labour utilisation. We've enjoyed favourable world trade prices, but we haven't been thinking about productivity when we design our policy.
So we dip into public finances in order to support the services in a greater way than we necessarily ought to be. Yeah.
That's right. Once you exclude population growth from your thinking about the economy, once you exclude public spending growth, most parts of the private sector aren't doing very well at all over the past decade. And that's true in BC and in Canada. So, we need to be thinking about what policies would make it attractive to base and build your business and expand your business in Canada or BC vis-a-vis the United States or anywhere else. That's really the big challenge and the question we haven't been asking over this time. So at the federal level, why would a company want to base themselves here? I mean, Donald Trump has been explicit and he said, we're pretty cool on the USMCA. They're thinking about, what they're going to do next year when it's up for review. Now, Canada's value proposition has always been that, we have Westminster institutions, rule of law, secure property rights. We have, educated workforce, boundless natural resources, and secure access to, one of the world's most advanced economies, which is big, large, and close. That's no longer guaranteed. So what's our value proposition? So, one of the first things that you do is you don't proceed with policies like the oil and gas emissions cap that has been proposed federally and also here. Energy is our number one export. It's also our highest productivity industry. If you put a cap on emissions, you're effectively putting a cap on production. There are other ways to manage domestic emissions, but putting an explicit cap on and hobbling your number one export is just going to make us all poorer. So number one, don't proceed with that. That's an easy one. It's the stroke of a pen. Number two is that, when we lost our corporate tax advantage relative to the United States in 2018, when they reduced their corporate taxes and they provided some accelerated depreciation measures, we followed suit. But our measures around accelerated depreciation were sort of short-lived and very focused on sort of machinery and equipment or clean tech industries and so forth. It was very specific and temporary. What we should be thinking about is when we have infrastructure and assets, investments here, if it's not bolted down, it can't go anywhere. So we actually need to encourage companies to invest here for the long term. And the way to do that is to allow companies to write off their assets at less than the effective life, provide an upfront deduction or a faster deduction than the asset will live.
They don't flee once the depreciation's done, or they actually stay
the
put?
asset's built, so they're going to continue to run the assets. Yeah. I mean, you look at there's a lot of challenges facing the forestry industry, but you don't see companies immediately shutting down their mills. We are seeing that, but it's happened over time. The good thing about having large companies basing themselves here and having fixed infrastructure, so fixed assets here is that it's less likely to pick up and walk across the border, from the latest, Trump musing on Truth Social.
Yeah. So we can look too at which hits, I think, people more personally, income tax levels, and whether they are competitive with parts of the United States or other jurisdictions where there is some labor mobility for people to go and work in other countries. Again, where are we positioned as a country and as a province around that?
Well, not well. In British Columbia, for example, the top marginal personal income tax rate kicks in at about $260,000, and it's 53.5 cents on the dollar, which makes somebody think twice about maybe doing overtime or taking a promotion because they think, well, more than half of an extra dollar of income that I make is going to be given up to taxation. BC actually has the fourth highest marginal tax rate on personal incomes in North America. And, Washington State is not very far away. Down there's no state income tax, and you've just got the federal income tax. So that's 37% is the top rate in the United States, and that doesn't kick in until you make about $600,000 or $700,000 US. So you've got this calculus facing skilled professionals, young people, entrepreneurs, business owners, about where to base themselves. come to Canada where the incomes are lower and the taxes are much, much higher. In fact, they're more than half once you get over 260,000 Canadian. And in the United States, you can earn, considerably higher market incomes and pay less tax on it. That is just not a competitive setup.
So the per capita income gap between us here in British Columbia and Washington State is what? Somewhere around $40,000.
That's right.
Yeah, that's profound. So we then look to our services and we say, well, we've got universal health care.
Right.
We've got great education, and we've got a stronger social safety net for those that fall into difficult circumstances.
Yep.
Are those really advantages any longer? Given that we've got emergency room closures and hospital cuts and school shortages, and particularly housing shortages that we can kind of see in this. So have we kind of lost the plot that way?
Well, I don't think anybody would say that health outcomes have greatly improved in BC, given all the extra spending that's gone on. I mean, I think people are fairly dissatisfied from what I can see in the health outcomes. It's too many queues, right? Too many closures, as you say. So we haven't been effective or efficient about how we've used the money. So I still think the healthcare system and the education system are an advantage, but they're not enough. They're not enough.
Yeah. You've done research recently on municipal taxation and tax levels. And I think it's one of those areas that gets a little bit under the radar because we focus on the big income tax stuff because it has much more of a profound impact seemingly. But municipalities have had services downloaded to them, have taken on responsibilities, maybe even gone a little beyond their lane on what they ought to be financing. And these taxes have grown at pretty astounding rates.
Yeah. I mean, this is a really important topic because I think we all acknowledge that we're going through an affordability crisis. So let's have a look at Statistics Canada's Consumer Price Index. And property taxes on owner-occupiers, just owner-occupiers, owner-occupied residents, accounts for about $1.50 of the CPI basket. And that over the last 15 years, property taxes in the CPI have increased by 94% in British Columbia. That's double the national average. The CPI as a whole only increased over 15 years by about 43%.
Yeah, we enjoyed a big period of nearly no inflation.
Yeah, if something increases by 2% over that period, it should have only increased by 36%. But we're at 94%. So we've seen spectacular increases in property taxes, and that's an underestimate because, as I said, I'm only talking about owner-occupied housing. We've also had increases on landlords who pass that on to tenants, particularly new tenants, on businesses. Businesses have been facing property tax hikes, and all of this adds, and businesses pass that on in their costs of goods to consumers. So all of this extra spending that's driving this, the municipal spending, and we're only talking about municipal operating spending, to be clear, not capital.
Not capital, yeah.
Not capital. The operating spending has been phenomenal. And what's going on there is there's not been really a change in the mix of spending. We're just spending far more. The spending is growing far more than population and inflation would justify. So two things are possible. Either municipalities in BC are delivering rolled gold services to their residents compared to anywhere else in Canada.
I'm not sure I know that town.
And people are flocking here to take advantage of that, which is not true. Or we've become less efficient over time in delivering core services, sanitation, police, and so forth.
Yeah. Let's go back to the productivity piece on this. Does investment in technology, in newer ways of doing things, even building your infrastructure, do those profoundly help to bring that, to retrieve some of that tax expenditure that appears to be quite inefficient right now?
Yeah, you would expect that that over time, by the use of technology, that we can deliver public services more efficiently. And you would need more capital, more technology, not more people necessarily to deliver the same services. But we've actually gone the other direction. So we've had in the public sector in BC in the past 5 years, we've had nearly a 40% increase in public sector employment versus a 5% increase in private sector employment. And I don't think anybody is saying that the services that we're seeing and the outcomes justify the expansions that we're seeing. On the productivity side, we have, we talked about personal income taxes, and that makes it really hard to attract and retain skilled workers, entrepreneurs, business owners, the people who can expand businesses and bring new skills. Makes it really hard to attract. The other is the provincial sales tax, which is really like a Flintstones type era tax.
Yeah.
It's an albatross around our necks. It's taxes cost you different amounts of economic activity to raise the revenue. And the PST is incredibly expensive to raise the revenue that it does. It costs, of a new investment project, about a quarter of it is lost to taxation in BC, whereas it's about half that in other provinces, 15 to 20% in other provinces. So it's a significant disadvantage for BC. It's something that we could do very easily. It's within our power to do it, to reform the PST by removing capital inputs from the PST. So when a business makes an investment, it doesn't pay PST. Simple as that. That would actually help us invest in machinery and equipment and tools and technologies in British Columbia that would help make us more productive.
Yeah. I look at this and how we de-escalate some of the expenditure in this, and what are we doing at this point in order to to kind of dial back a lot of the expenditure on this. Do you have some solutions here about what we can do when you consider the dependency that we have in some cases on these expenditures that aren't terribly productive for us?
Well, you're talking about public spending. I think federally, provincially, and at the municipal level, this is just my personal view, I think that we've had a cavalier attitude to spending growth, sort of a devil-may-care approach that the taxpayers will wear it and will be able to borrow to fund it, to fund the deficits. We haven't really been thinking about that every dollar that we raise in tax revenue is a dollar stripped out of the economy. That's a dollar that's not in someone's pocket, of a customer. That's a dollar out of their pocket that can't be spent in your shop, right, or at your business. That's money that can't be spent on children's sport, right, by a household, or holidays. Any of the things that we might like to do, that's taken out and it's being used by the government. And all we ask is that it's being used wisely. And based on the outcomes that we're seeing, the spending growth that we're seeing, I don't think people are saying that the outcomes have improved. So we have to be a bit more mindful of the use of the funds.
And have we gone in a way too far now to retrieve this? Have we gone too far with expenditures? Have we gone too far around dependency on housing revenue, property tax revenue, where we've kind of lost our own plot here?
Well, I think municipal, yes. The municipal spending in BC has been extraordinary. Federally, I mean, what I would say about the federal finance is look, Canada is a G7 country. It's an advanced country. We have advanced and stable institutions. And yet, in 2 of the last 5 years, the federal government has been unable to deliver a budget. This year, they were not going to deliver a budget. Now they're going to deliver a budget on November the 4th for the fiscal year that began on the 1st of April. So 7 months into the budget year, we're going to find out what the budget is for the remaining 5 months of the year. And in 2020, to my knowledge, Canada was the only country in the world where its national government was unable or unwilling to produce a budget. The federal finances are very, very important to this country because we have a strong credit rating. If that's put in jeopardy, it also affects the finances of the provinces. It affects their credit ratings and their cost of borrowing. And the provincial finances are in a lot worse shape, particularly in BC. BC's fiscal situation is concerning, but the trajectory that BC has been on over the past 3 years has been alarming. The provincial finances have unravelled at a breathtaking pace since 2023. Yeah.
As we conclude, a couple of things to point to. We can see now that the federal government is intent on a significant amount of what it calls investment. You could look at it also as just expenditure on a raft of projects, on a raft of initiatives, on the ability of the country to keep pace around technological change and all that. If you had to point to where this so-called investment is most strategically beneficial to the country, where do you think you need to allocate?
Well, let's bear in mind that Canada doesn't have a very good track record of industrial policy. Those industrial subsidies have usually not delivered value for money. So I'm a little nervous about the idea of having, a concierge model of, shepherding projects through, fast tracking, they call it, politically favoured projects going through. We have a broad-based problem in Canada around the lack of private sector vibrancy. We're not competitive. Our taxes aren't competitive. Our regulatory system has a high burden and a high cost, and we actually need to be more focused on having high standards and minimum burden.
Is trying to build 500,000 houses a year in this country an effective form of investment, do you think?
Well, no, because it's a fantasy. I mean, you'd have to believe in fairies living at the bottom of your garden to believe that that's what's going to happen. So I don't find that particularly helpful. Yeah. If the federal government is going to continue to stoke go back to stoking a credit boom in Canada, we're not going to have cheap housing. In 3 years between 2020 and 2022, with zero interest rates and loose macroprudential policy, and forward guidance that interest rates would remain low for long, the amount of credit that was created in Canada for mortgages increased by $500 billion. We went from about $1.6 trillion of mortgages secured against the housing stock to about 2.1 during that time. In 3 years, that's a 1/3 increase in the amount of debt against a particular asset class. There are about 16.1 million homes in Canada as of 2021. We build about 250,000 a year, which is tiny. That's about 1 or 2% of the stock. If you're going to have a 1/3 increase in the amount of credit that you're borrowing against an asset class, the price of it is going to go up a lot. You can't build enough to offset that. It's just it's a pipe dream. So the federal government really is largely responsible for overseeing a credit boom, and they have constitutional responsibility for housing finance. And we have the third most indebted households in the world. Most of that is mortgage debt. You're not going to have cheap resale home prices relative to incomes on the back of that. So,
the next budget's going to be quite exciting. It's going to be a momentous budget, probably the largest one we've seen in a while. So it's been really good to get a bit of a setup on the conditions that we have for all of this. And it's great to spend some time with you, David. It's good seeing you.
I mean, I'm hoping that we see some more fiscal discipline at the federal and provincial level and municipal level than we've seen, because we need to. We're under pressure now.
Yeah. So what you're telling me is that we almost have no choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. David, good to see you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Kirk.
David Williams, of course, is Vice President of Policy at the Business Council of British Columbia. I'm Kirk LaPointe. Thanks a lot for watching the SMB Report. We'll see you next time.